There are two key ideas I've come across when it comes to my own personal development that I believe have made the biggest positive impact on my life. Two powerful principles of personal development that have contributed to me feeling less anxious, happier, more resilient, more able to get shit done than any other ideas I'd come across previously. The first principle led me to the shift that pulled me out of 3.5 years of chronic anxiety and depression. The second principle has led to me becoming much kinder to myself and more psychologically grounded and liberated than ever before. But the strange thing is, these principles are totally opposite of each other, and you could argue undermine each other completely. Curious to find out what they are and if they can help you? Well, let's go. So in just a moment, I'm going to share with you the two positive and powerful, paradoxically profound principles of personal development that changed my life. I don't want to say that in a hurry. Positive and powerful, paradoxically profound. Positive and paradoxically powerful and positive, profound, paradoxical. My name's Howard Cooper, and for over 20 years now, I specialised in helping people to become free from anxiety. I've helped thousands of people over the years, and my passion for this comes from the fact that as a teen, I struggled terribly with anxiety, and I found that traditional methods of just talking about my problems didn't really help. So this channel is all about sharing tried and tested strategies for beating anxiety and positively changing your life. If that sounds like your kind of thing, then click subscribe now, hit the bell, you'll be notified when new content comes out. All right then, so what are these two principles that I've been hyping up? The first principle I came across around 23 years ago that changed my life was we can control our thinking. The second principle I came across around 10 years ago that also changed my life was we can't control our thinking. What's that? That doesn't make any sense. Stop confusing everyone. Okay, so on the face of it, this is, as I said earlier, somewhat paradoxical, but bear with me, because understanding these two shifts in thinking, however contradictory they may seem, may just help you too. So let's take them one at a time, break them down, explain what I mean, and then towards the end, let me share how and why I think these two principles can play nicely together. And quick aside, if you're enjoying this video so far and/or it's making you think, then I'd really appreciate it if you gave this video a like, because that's the thing that helps YouTube know that this is a video worth sharing more widely. Principle 1. We can control our thinking. When I was 15 years old, I was diagnosed with having a severe anxiety and panic disorder. I genuinely felt like a victim to waves of anxiety and panic and shortness of breath, and was racked with why me thinking. And then I spent pretty much 3.5 years in therapy talking about my issues and just secretly hoping someone would fix me, because I was simply a victim to it all. But I ended up, through a variety of factors, coming across American motivational speaker Tony Robbins, and at the tender age of 19 ended up on his 4-day event called Unleash the Power Within. Turns out he had a background in neuro-linguistic programming. And one of the key ideas that I took from this experience was that we are creating our own realities through our thoughts. This experience made me kind of look at myself and my experience and start asking some different questions. What thinking was I doing that was creating anxiety? What if instead of me being a victim to anxiety, I was actually the creator of it? Not necessarily deliberately, but through doing certain patterns of thinking. Hold on a moment. What if I could get really good at controlling my thinking? What if, instead of being a victim to my thoughts, I could learn how to change the way I thought to myself? So, for example, if I was scaring myself with catastrophic thinking of worst case scenarios, scaring myself with big mental images of terrible things happening to me and freaking out, what if I could learn to control my thinking so that every time a terrible thought appeared, I could make it smaller or step out of it or push it away and then just imagine how great things would be. And if I got into the habit of doing that repeatedly, then surely that new pattern of thinking would become a habit. Just stop and think about the power of this mental shift. I went from being a passenger in the back seat of my brain to being a driver and choosing the direction I wanted to go in. That's a profound shift in terms of taking ownership and control and responsibility in your own life, and likely an attitude that could benefit many people who are struggling with this kind of stuff. Side note, I often frequent anxiety forums on Facebook, and I'm often mesmerised by the number of people who regularly post the same kind of comments like, "I'm really struggling with anxiety again, can anyone help, or has anyone got any tips?" Yet seem entirely unwilling to actually take action, practice, or implement any tips. Secretly, it seems like they just want someone to fix them. Anyhow, I trained up in NLP and hypnotherapy, and this idea of showing people how to control their thinking seems so important. In fact, helping people to stop pointing outwards for the source of their problems and to start getting curious about what thinking they are doing that's likely the cause of the anxious feeling is still a message I'm pushing too. However, something happened a little while ago that made me question everything. I came across the work of Jørgen Rasmussen, a wonderful change worker based in Norway and now a good friend and colleague, and trained with him in his approach he calls the psychological illusion model. And he began to encourage me to reflect on the notion of free will and whether we really did control our thinking. Side note, by the way, it's important to understand that the idea that we can control our thinking was really important to me and my work. Yet I'm reminded of Paul Sappho's idea of having strong beliefs weakly held. Yes, I believed in the idea that we could control our thinking very strongly indeed, and in fact I had proof that it must be true because I felt I'd learned to control my thinking and that it had been helpful to me. But could I hold this strong belief weakly enough to also consider a new factor or some new ideas or new possibilities? So I read Sam Harris's book on free will, I chatted with people, I explored these ideas with clients and myself, and increasingly began to realise the truth of principle number 2. We don't control our thinking. Now, don't get me wrong, it really does feel like we do, but let's try a thought experiment. Nice and quickly, pick an animal. Got one? Great. Now the question is, was that a free choice? And did you choose it? Now likely it really felt like you had a free choice and that you chose it right. However, I'm going to ask you to humour me and consider something totally outlandish. That wasn't really a free choice and you didn't choose it. And no, I haven't gone crazy. But I'm curious as to how able you are to see this. Have you ever heard of the animal a baboon? The likelihood is yes, but now let me ask you this question and be honest. When I asked you to pick an animal, did the option baboon even pop up in your head? Chances are it didn't. In which case, how could you ever have chosen something that didn't even appear as an option? So what sort of choice was it really? In the moment I asked you to pick an animal, surely it was only then a choice of the things that popped up into your mind as options. Side note, if by a total fluke you chose baboon and are watching this video, then let me know in the comments if you are totally freaking out right now. Now a lot of people only have one animal that appears. Yeah, some choice, isn't it, between that one and that one. And I'll say to people, be honest. Did you actively or consciously go and get that thought and bring it up from your filing cabinet of animals to choose from? Or were you just sitting there minding your own business and when I asked you to pick an animal, it just appeared? Seriously, what part do you actually play in that decision? Unconscious processes determined by the brain fired off, an option appeared before you as a thought. Now some people say, well, I had a few options pop up, so I did choose badger. It was my choice. So let me give you an example of a recent client who I was working with who chose badger and was adamant he had chosen it out of another option that had appeared. I said, when I asked you to pick an animal, what was the first option that popped up in your thinking? He said, elephant. Okay, and then what happened? I thought to myself, that's too obvious. Howard's probably expecting that, so let's make it tougher. I thought, this was hilarious. Okay, then what happened next? And then he said, I thought badger. In other words, he was sitting there minding his own business, and when I asked him to pick an animal, his neurology just whirred without any nudge from himself, and up popped image of elephant. And then his neurology whirred and up popped the thought, let's screw Howard over and pick something difficult, followed by the whirring and the thought, badger. Sure, he was aware these thoughts were appearing, but he wasn't picking any one of these thoughts, they just appeared. Instead of watching a play with just one scene, he was watching a play with 3, but when he really reflected on his actual experience, he wasn't the writer, author or director of this play, he was just the observer. Okay, so enough about animals, badgers and elephants. What's the point here? The point here is that despite how it feels, we don't actually control our thinking. And this can be an immensely freeing thing to realise and truly experience. But how so? Well, let me give you an experience from my own life. I was standing on the platform, waiting to catch a London tube, and they came over the tannoy to announce that unfortunately the train would be delayed because there had been a jumper. In other words, someone had tragically leapt in front of a train to kill themselves. And at that very moment, I became acutely aware of the thoughts that popped up in my thinking, and I'm going to be totally honest with you about what they were. The first thought was, oh my God, that's awful. The second thought that appeared was, arsehole, now I'm going to be late. The third thought was, I wonder if he had family or kids. The fourth thought was, I wonder if I can see any body parts on the line. The fifth thought was,
How could I think such a thing? The sick thought was, what am I having for dinner later?
Well, a little bit like choosing an animal. I wasn't consciously choosing to bring up any of these thoughts at all. Simply, I was watching them appear before me. But can you imagine if I was a positivity Instagram poster who only posted things about being loved and liked, and how we must be positive all the time at every moment and never have any terrible thoughts? Well, if that were me, then how would I respond having thoughts like, arsehole, I'm going to be late, or I wonder if I can see any body parts? Well, likely I'd get caught up in self-rating myself as a terrible human being, thinking, how could I think such things? And then I'd inevitably try and control my thoughts even more, and ironically, thoughts like I'm struggling to control my thinking would be appearing outside of my control, because we don't control our thinking. We simply observe it. So for me, really seeing that I don't control my thinking means that I'm a lot kinder to myself and my own internal experience, and stop judging myself so harshly for things that I can't control. It's immensely freeing, right?
However, by now, and rightly so, you may be thinking, okay, I get what you're saying, but how on earth do these two principles play together? Surely these two ideas can't be compatible with each other? So here's my take on this. Have you ever been to a pizza restaurant? If so, why didn't you order sushi? Seriously, when you went to the pizza restaurant, why didn't you order sushi? Correct. Wasn't on the menu. So be honest, how many years have you spent since that pizza experience berating yourself that you didn't choose sushi? My guess is none, because it wasn't even an option.
So put yourself in the shoes of my 19-year-old self, who'd spent 3.5 years in therapy really consolidating the belief that I was simply a victim to anxiety. What are the options on the menu of my thoughts that were likely appearing to me? Likely thoughts like, I'm no good, why me, I can't cope, I'm never going to be better. But what do you think changed for me after learning about NLP and exposing myself to the ideas that you can control your thinking? Well, likely some new options appeared on the menu of my thoughts. Things like, I can take control, I can make the image smaller in my mind, I can beat this.
Now these thoughts appear on the menu in my mind. Chances are I feel and respond in a more empowered way, and this helps me. In fact, becoming people to really become absorbed in the illusion that you can control your thinking can indeed be very empowering and useful.
In other words, it's like adding sushi onto the pizza restaurant menu, but realizing that you still didn't write the menu. It's just that the menu that's been presented to you now has a few more options on it that might contain some dishes you prefer or might be more useful to you.
So yes, whilst I really don't think that we can control our thoughts, I think there are times that uncontrollably having the thought, I can control my thoughts, pop up, can be useful from time to time.
Hope this trip down the paradoxical has not melted your brain too much, and if you enjoyed the video or want to share any reflections on this or even ask further questions, then please drop me a comment below. All the best, and hope you enjoyed.